all good things they say have to come to an end, and so does our stay at Rio. What a wonderful 5 days it's been here in Rio, and not just the Congress. We are of course going to come to that, but the Samba beach, the opening ceremony, the visit to the museum, the sugar loaf, the party, oh wow, the beaches. How can we forget the Rio beaches, the best in the world, they would say. It's been an amazing time that we've had the 5 days here in Rio. And the IFA Brazil president, Gustavo Bragaglio, did not overstate when he said on Sunday during the opening ceremony, welcome to the Rio experience. It's been a wonderful 5 days, Peter.
It's been
of course, and let me introduce my guest, Peter Barnes, who was with Kaplan and Drysdale in United States, formerly tax head at General Electric, if I'm not wrong. To my left, TP Oswald, renowned international tax expert and partner with DTS Associates. And to Peter's right, Kuntal Dave. He is now an executive member at IFA and also partner at DTS Associates, and knowledge partners for the IFA coverage of Tax Sutra. And let me begin with Peter. Wonderful 5 days here.
It was indeed. The Brazilian hospitality couldn't have been better. And from a professional standpoint, Brazil has its own unique place in the world with some specialized rules, and it was great fun to meet with our Brazilian colleagues, a large number of Brazilian colleagues, and talk to them and party with them.
Yes, Brazil is a unique, and in fact we are quite excited to see how they are going to be now changing their rules when they join OECD. Let's see, because what Peter says is right. They are unique in different in number of respects. Particularly look at the transfer pricing, they're totally different, and they call themselves to be arm's length, but they are different from the OECD. Therefore, let us see what happens, and it is an exciting time. What you say is right. The conference has been great success. Conference, all sightseeing and all other things are also great success. Events are very good. The Brazilian beaches are beautiful, as you said rightly, and of course, the technical content of the Congress was fabulous.
Peter, let's quickly get down to the technical deliberations. What were the key highlights for you? The main plenary is where on BEPS and the future of transfer pricing. We had some exhilarating discussions.
Well, one thing that's important to recognize is this was again a conference in a developing country. We were in Mumbai, of course, 3 years ago. And when we were in Mumbai, there was a great focus on developing country needs. The last 2 years have been Switzerland and Spain. Coming back to a developing country, we had the voices of the enormous number of countries where tax administration is very challenging, where some of the rules are different. So one of the highlights to me was certainly focusing on transfer pricing from a Brazilian perspective and from the world's perspective, where the challenges are different and sometimes much greater than they are in the developed world.
On BEPS, we had a lot of discussions on automatic exchange of information, a big debate on whether CBCR should be made public. You also had some interesting deliberations on so many permutations and combinations in the MLI.
Well, on the MLI, yes. Let me go to the CBC, country by country reporting. I think the question there is whether the governments do make use of it and can make use of it in an intelligent way. It's a significant burden on the taxpayers, and if that significant burden pays off with useful information, terrific. If it is a big burden and there's not useful information or misuse of the information, then we've wasted an awful lot of time and money. And we'll know in the next 2 years how the C by C reporting is used once it gets into the hands of the tax administrations.
You see, CBCR report is very important what he says, but more chances of misuse are there than the use. No, leaks is understandable, but misuse, because if two countries interpret the provisions differently. For example, let me give a simple example. You in India need huge number of manpower to do work. In number of other countries, manpower requirement is very less because of robotic, because of automatic working, because of automation. In such a situation, you will take a view, the Indian authorities taking view, there is no substance in the other country, only in our country there is a substance. I think one has to customize now, all these rules have been created, but now these must be interpreted correctly in a proper spirit, and if they are not interpreted in a proper spirit, there will be a chance, there are greater chances of misuse.
Kuntal, the session on future of transfer pricing was again fascinating. You had certain fundamental points being made, some philosophical points being made. I think Professor Richard Van, he really stood out, when he talked about Dempy Dams on what is meant by value creation, on whether you can tax something that you cannot see, and so on. Fascinating discussions.
Yeah, I think, but if we always need to keep our mind clear on the basics, like change to the technology, new way of doing business is not new in today's time. If you recollect, there is jurisprudence that when radio transmitter was introduced in the US, we have jurisprudence that how the tax rules will have to keep pace with that. We had vending machine decision which says that how a sale will take place by using a vending machine. So now we are looking at a new future of artificial intelligence, robotax. So I think exciting time, but one thing which is clear that the ongoing changes to the taxing rules, one earlier felt that physical presence is necessary, human intervention is necessary, but with robotax, artificial intelligence, whether those test points are going to be relevant, and I think it's going to be something where everybody will have to have a collaborative effort to find out new way of ensuring that you have a harmonized tax system, so that at the end of the day, businesses doesn't suffer and there is a tax certainty.
Just add one more. Just look at the UN presentation you have seen. In the UN report of 2017, we have now new concept coming in. For rendering of services, you do not need a physical presence, and it will be taxed. Now this is going to create tensions in the world, because there are developing countries who want to seek the tax on services. Developed countries are opposing. And now what Peter said about the conference, India, Brazil conference, great success. I think inclusive framework will require more and more such conferences to be held in the developing countries, so that the capacity there is getting developed, and therefore uniformity in interpretation of rules can be advocated and can be told to them, so that it will be applied universally.
Peter, isn't that the key to BEPS implementation? When you had Pascal say on Monday that we need to see to it that BEPS is properly and consistently implemented, how hopeful are you about that?
I'm mildly hopeful, but let me say... Mildly hopeful, but let me say, tax professionals and businesses always ask for more certainty than they are ever going to get. It is silly to expect that you're going to have immediate tax certainty. So we as tax professionals have to be ready to adjust to changes and not expect a level of certainty that's just not achievable. Let me just mention one other thing, particularly for the India audience. There was a wonderful seminar on value-added tax, goods and services tax, and as India is challenged to implement its national GST, VAT, it's important to recognize the subtleties, the complexities of that tax. Tax professionals tend to think of value-added tax as just arithmetic. It's not. And the seminar here on value-added tax was quite useful.
Absolutely.
And if you think about it, that US being a developed economy do not have VAT. And so how they are going to get difficult situation to alter their tax policy with the absence of VAT is also very interesting to see.
Before I go to Amay, I quickly want to ask you, Peter, on what Philip Baker, we always have done the end of Congress recap with Philip for the last few years. He isn't here. Next year we are going to have both of you do that. But what Philip wrote for Tax Sutra is that whether MLI means a tax piece or whether it means complete appending of tax treaties and therefore new controversies, the jury is still out. Which way are you swinging towards?
Well, I think what's important to recognize is that although the MLI says multilateral, tax treaties are still bilateral. The MLI is really just a tool in order to get the bilateral treaties amended and modernized much more quickly. So the real work is going to be, after someone signs the MLI, how is that interpreted on a bilateral basis? And we'll see. I'm optimistic, but I recognize that you may have two countries in a bilateral agreement disagree on how the multilateral treaty has amended their agreement.
Amay, the highlights of the technical deliberations for you over the last 4 days, they were high quality.
Yeah, absolutely. IFA on the scientific program is always high quality, and a lot of philosophical thoughts also come out of it.
Anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, so two specific points out of the technical session. One is on the on the issue of BEPS and the fact that inclusive framework is going to play a very, very significant role. That's one aspect, and the related aspect is the greater source focus on the source-based taxation. I mean, you name it as a diverted profit tax, you name it as a equalization levy, or you name it as a ALSS, the new acronym that OECD has framed. But I think clearly the focus is going to be on the source-based taxation. And the second part came out in yesterday's panel on the VAT, and we should not ignore that aspect. There's already a framework, a soft law instrument in the form of international VAT guidelines. In Indian context, mind you, a lot of issues that have been discussed over there will be relevant in the context of GST as well. But I think the disharmony in the international tax on VAT particularly is going to be again a key area where I think there is a multilateral effort that has already started happening.
The big breaking news, I think, was when Pascal talked about the digital economy taxation report, an interim report by next April. You're hopeful, Oswalji? He said that any solution, he just gave an interview to us, he said any solution will be controversial.
Nothing will happen till US agrees.
Which right now doesn't look, the chances, the probability is a little less.
US will stop the aids to OECD. What will happen? The OECD is under pressure.
Sure. Anything else from the transfer pricing panel, Amay, or some of the other panels like cost sharing, cost contribution arrangements? Anything that came out from those panels which the viewers could take away?
The transfer pricing, certainly there's a lot of focus on the value creation, and one comment which is very, very telling is that what is value? Nobody can see it, nobody can perceive it, and therefore it has always been a very subjective matter. And with BEPS, a lot of discussion happening. There is going to be a further complication on the value creation, and there's an added dimension with a country like India aggressively pushing the force for market-based compensation. So,
actually, Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan also made a push for a definition overall as far as P is concerned to tax digital presence.
I can tell you one thing: the OECD believes in only one analysis: functions, assets, and risks. And in my opinion, marketplace, if you ignore, it is incomplete, and therefore my opinion is it should be farm analysis. Function, asset, risk, and marketplace.
Yet Peter and Kuntal, you had I think one of the panelists from the Future of Transfer Pricing panel saying that even the concept of risk is morphing into something else. So
well, it just shows the lack of harmonization, that we still have a very long way to go to ensure that different countries all view how to compute your attributable profits in a similar way. We're still a long way away from that.
Kuntal, on the APA session quickly, APAs are here to stay, but we had a fascinating discussion on how the unilateral APAs are a dirty word, the push towards bilateral, multilateral APAs, the interplay between the EU state aid and the APAs.
Yeah, I think in the first day when we had carried out this particular analysis, we did highlight the role of APA. APA is here to stay. But another thing which you mentioned about recent developments, I think what we saw, that exchange of information across all the jurisdiction is going to play such an important role for tax compliance as well as for effective implementation of taxing rules. And if you also notice that especially the experience of Latin American countries, that they had all come out with the voluntary disclosure schemes which were of a huge success. We are looking at jurisdiction collecting as much as $10 billion on account of voluntary disclosure scheme. I think this is something which we as an Indian jurisdiction perhaps missed out an opportunity that in a changing times, if we had come out with a scheme which would have encouraged
10 lakh crores
which have encouraged our people to come out and be clean. So
the experience, if you look at the statistics which were shown of the other countries, we were the highest tax rates in the amnesty scheme.
65,000 crores were raised, and we had a tax rate of how much? 40 plus 10%?
45%, then 60%, and all sort of things. But the question is, if we rate if that shows one philosophical thing, that if you make the rate of tax reasonable, people are voluntarily ready to pay the tax.
Yeah, and we'll close out with the fair tax debate that took place yesterday. Very interesting debate again on tax morality, and a few points that came out was, I think what the French tax court judge, Mr. Philippe Martin, said, ultimately you have to connect tax morality to judicial principles.
Well, we've seen in India as well a spate of few rulings as well. Individual philosophy does get into it. My personal view, while setting the tax policy, yes, the morality would be relevant. But once you have a law, the morality should not be brought into the interpretation.
Quick word.
No way, I don't agree with him. The law should be created in a manner that it should have a moral impact of that. And if you try to be unreasonable, the law will be interpreted unreasonably. So morality is a part of both the sides.
Morality has reached the Brazilian shores as well.
Yeah, let me just say, as one conference closes, we're already looking to the next. We'll be meeting a year from now in Seoul, and India will take a central place. One of the two main topics is anti-avoidance rules and GAR. And my guess is that at next year's Congress in Seoul, India's experience during its first year and a half of the GAR will be a very key topic. So it'll be fun to see how India unfolds with the GAR and how our discussion
GAR and
goes.
SOIM as well.
GAR and anti-avoidance rules broadly, and how that is reflected in next year's Congress.
Final word, Kuntal, quick.
No, just continuing with the topic of tax morality, which was probably discussed in one of the panels also. Because if you are going to address the tax issues and challenges on the grounds of morality, you will have no winners. Tax officers are not going to be the winner, business is going to be a loser. So what it requires is a balanced approach and a consultative approach to ensure that everybody wins at the end of the day.
Can we quickly pull in Padam sir, Padam Kincha and Asim Chawla, both again Indians, dear friends who attend every IFA Congress. Your quick thoughts on the Congress, 20 seconds each.
Well, this Congress and the topics have been extremely refreshing, as the venue just suggests so. I mean, the topics and the discussions were very far-sighted, very well-rounded, gives a perspective of things to come in future, taxation of robots, tax morality, BEPS was center stage, so it has really set the precedent and maybe not only high benchmark, a great foundation of the change in the tax policy in terms of the next generation of international tax code and dialogue.
Padam sir, you are a difficult man to please, but you are pleased.
I am very much pleased because of the thought process in the entire deliberation that have happened. Thought process has been at a very elevated level. We as practitioners normally look into the micro level semantics and technicalities, but to get the broad level perspective, the macro level, philosophical level, it's been a wonderful time to understand the broad philosophy as to what should go into a particular development or a particular nuance in relation to
I'll put you on a tough spot. The one, if you had to pick only one session, if I kept the gun on your head and asked you to pick one session which you like the best.
I like the tax morality very much. There were very interesting insights because there was a judge who was making a point as to how he'll approach. He says, you do what you want. I look at the law only. I don't look at morality. I don't look at principles. There was a practitioner who was saying something else. There was the government side trying to say that morality is extremely important. So the different insights into a particular topic from different angles was extremely, to me, a very thought-provoking process.
We've absolutely run out of time. Oswal ji has the last word. One line. What do we look forward to next year?
Well, as Peter said, next year in Seoul, we have major topic is going to be GAR and anti-avoidance. And yes, India's experience will be very relevant because we are one of the pioneers in the developing world in getting the detailed GAR. As far as the other countries are concerned, they had the GAR. South Africa had GAR, but no judicial experience, interpretational issues which they have come out with. They have come out with the detailed guidelines. Unfortunately, India has not. That is the only difference.
That's